You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast. As always, this is Daniel Barrett here from AdWordsNerds.com. And this week, this one's a little different. This is a different kind of show than I typically offer. Now, our guest, you may have heard on this podcast before, I had on Brad Chandler from Express Home Buyers and now BradChandlerCoaching.com. All right, now Brad is an incredibly successful real estate investor. He has flipped thousands of homes, but I wanted to have Brad on the show today to talk about the work he is doing now with his coaching business, which you can find at BradChandler.com. Now, Brad is an incredibly insightful, incredibly intuitive person, and I worked with Brad after the last time he was on the show, and, well, I'm going to let the show speak for itself. If you want to hear what my reaction was to working with Brad, you are going to hear it on this episode. Without any further ado, let's get into this very special interview with Brad Chandler from BradChandler.com. Brad, welcome to the show, man. So happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I think this makes you a three-timer, by the way, third time on the show, which I think is a first. I don't think anyone's been on the show 3 times. I could be wrong, but I'm super happy to have you on here. You've been on, we've talked about a bunch of different things. This week's going to be a little bit different because we're actually going to focus in a little bit more on kind of the new nature of your work and how that can really impact particularly entrepreneurs, like people who are out there making a difference in the world, building businesses, and people who really want to kind of multiply their efforts there. So I'm super excited to talk about this. Before we get into that, for anybody that missed any of our other episodes or who isn't familiar with you, tell me your story. Like, give us your background. Who are you in the real estate investing space and who are you today?
Yeah, so let's go back to 9th grade. I read a book on how to buy real estate with no money down. And at the time, I knew I had to do real estate because that was one place I could make a lot of money. And why is it important to make money? We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But so read the book and fast forward to 2002, an investor bought my neighbor's house in Vienna, Virginia. And I went and talked with him and he said, yeah, I buy houses at below market. I fix them up and I resell them. And I'm like, wow, I think the book I read talked about maybe more about putting 20% down, getting a loan, waiting for the house to pay off. And that's how you made your money. So I was like, woo, I can make money flipping houses. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this. So I literally said, I'm going to do this in November or December of 2002. And I started working my butt off at that time, Dan. I mean, I was working a full-time job. My son was just born. So I'd come home at 6 and spend 6 to 8 with him, put him to sleep, and then work from like 8 to 11 every night, pounding We Buy Houses signs, hand addressing hundreds of envelopes. And each week went by, no deal, no deal. Each month went by, no deal. And I was like, wait, I can see other people making this work. So I'm going to make this work. In July, I got my first house. In July and August, I got 6 houses. So I had about 60 grand in the bank, $80,000 worth of debt. So I still had a negative $20,000 net worth. And I went to my boss and I said, hey, I quit. And I came home and I told my wife at the time, I said, yeah, I just quit. I'm forming Express Home Buyers. And she's like, have you lost your mind? We have a newborn and I've got 2 kids. Like, what do you think? And I was like, it'll be fine. And here we are, that was 2003, 21 years later. And everything was fine. We flipped over 4,000 houses, and now that business runs pretty much without me. I show up for an hour manager's meeting, and that business now allows me to do what I was really put on this earth to do.
That is, I love that story. I love the fact, by the way, I also love like all the little weird chance encounters that everybody always runs into. So it's just like your neighbor sold their house to an investor and kind of like really like, scoots your life path in a certain direction. Okay, so you mentioned this, Express Home Buyers, many people may have heard of it. It's a really, really successful investing company. It's one of the websites I always point people to when I want to say like, go check out a website. People have done a really good job marketing their investing brand. And you mentioned it kind of runs without you at this point, but I imagine that it wasn't always like that. Like you said, you sort of made the jump when you're negative 20, which is, that's a nervous kind of thing. So like, what were the stuff that like you struggled with? Because I know as an entrepreneur, there's a million things that I struggle with. What were the things that really like got you either then or today or both?
I mean, Dan, this is where we're going with this whole topic, right? This whole podcast today. And it's really incredible. We'll go back to the comment I made on money. Why did I pick real estate when I was in ninth grade? Well, I thought that money would bring me worthiness and happiness because I didn't feel worthy. So when I look back and you're talking about the company running without me, and I'm literally just thinking, wow, would the company have been better without me years ago? And the answer probably is yes, because I had this sense of unworthiness. So I created a ton of chaos in my business. It was always, what's the next thing that I can do? I'm going to go open Virginia Beach in 2010 or 2012. And I'm going to hire 5 people and I'm going to sign an office lease, but I don't even have a system for keeping the brochure boxes and the for sale signs filled in my home market. Little things like that, but I'm going to go start a whole nother market. Why? Because my subconscious mind was saying, if you can do this, you're going to be worthy. And right now you're not worthy. So my biggest issues in business were lack of focus and always trying to distract myself from the way that I felt, trying to get into a way of feeling better. And I thought that came by making money. Wow. So chaos. We had an exit interview one time and someone said, if you don't like what Brad does, just wait a week, because I was all over the place all the time. And I don't think I'm the only one with that issue.
No, dude, it's so funny. Like I just had this, I just let someone go from my business as someone who's been here for a while, pretty high ranking person, and I'm stepping into their job. And I was saying to myself, like, for maybe like the last 3 or 4 years, I've tried to like step out of my business, kind of get it to where you're at, right? Where it runs without me. But what I constantly find is I have to step back in. And in fact, today I'm like more involved in it than I was a year and a half ago. And it's happened enough times where I'm kind of like, what's the deal with that? You know what I mean? Like, why can't I seem to get over this hump? So yes, you're not there. Let me go back. I want to pinpoint something. You said something about unworthiness, like you were feeling unworthy and you're sort of filling it with all this chaos and stuff. So like, tell me what that means to you. Like when you say like, oh, I had this issue with unworthiness, what do you mean by that? How does that manifest?
Yeah, what a great question. So I developed a self-love quiz for this very reason, because if we were on this podcast 5 years ago and you asked me, did I feel worthy and did I have self-love? I would have said, yeah. And if you just said, Brad, do you care what other people think? I'd have been like, no.
Right.
So Dan, did I wake up every day and be like, you're no good? No. But did I tell my second wife many, many times like how dumb I was? Did I ask my second wife to tell me how handsome and sexy I was, and it didn't matter how many times she told me it wasn't enough? Yeah. Did I use weed on a nightly basis for a couple of years? Yes. Did I always want to smoke weed or have a couple of drinks before going to a party or going to someplace I knew I was going to be dancing or singing or karaokeing? Yes. Why? Because I was fearful of people judging me because I didn't feel worthy. Why did my marriages not work? Because we couldn't come together on anything because I didn't feel worthy. Why did I buy a boat when I was 47 years old and didn't even know how to rate a chart? Never owned a boat. I bought a 42-foot boat and said, I got to take this to the Bahamas, because I had this sense of nothing is good enough. You've just got to keep proving to the world that you're enough. So that's how it manifested. But I never woke up thinking you're a piece of shit and you're not going to do anything. Like I was driven to make a bunch of money because I was like, I've got to show the world that I'm somebody.
Okay. But at this point, right? So you're buying the boat, right? This is post, like you're not 20K in the hole anymore. At this point, you're
no,
right? Like,
no,
we haven't talked, you're married, you got the business, I know you've got kids. Like you had most of the stuff that people want and like want to achieve and want to do. So like, where does the sense of this is not enough, I'm not enough, I'm unworthy, like where does all that come from? Because you had the stuff. So it seems like you should be able to look out at the boat and be like, I did that, way to go. You know what I mean? Where does that come from?
No, Dan. No, first of all, when I bought the boat, it was a couple months after my second wife literally walked out on me and said, she was like, I'm done. And within 7 days, the house was packed up and she was gone.
Wow.
So I wasn't married and looking at, I was like, woe is me. And I was going to go out with this boat and set the world on fire. Look, when you don't feel enough, it doesn't matter if you have a 42-foot boat or a 420-foot boat. You still don't feel enough. You know, one of our mentors, our Marissa Peer, who we both know, she says that she's never dealt, and she's helped thousands of addicts over her 40-year career. Never has she met an addict that felt enough. Now, I wasn't an addict, but I certainly didn't feel enough. And when you're not enough, why is an addict an addict? Because nothing is ever enough. It's just more, more, more. Look at Michael Jackson and Prince and Matthew Perry and Amy Winehouse. They had so much money, but it was never enough. They just had to keep going and going and going. So that is one of the big lessons I've learned in the last 3 years, is that I spent 47 years, Dan, searching for stuff outside of myself for happiness. And when I realized, oh my gosh, everything is inside of me, that's when everything in my world changed, including my finances.
Okay, so I guess my question on that is it just a matter then of understanding? I guess here's my real question. Fine, okay, let's accept that as a premise, right? That like at the core of this, people have this kind of thing where they feel like, okay, I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. I've got to fill that hole in some way. I've got to compensate in some way, right? And totally get that, and definitely would notice that in my life. And it seems like you see that in your life. But like, how do you turn that off? Isn't that just like part of being human? You know what I mean? Like, how do you get out of buying a boat? By the way, what happened to the boat? We got to close the loop on the boat. What happened to the boat? Do you still have the boat?
So I made it to the Florida Keys. It was literally one of the most epic trips I've ever been on in my life. So I don't have any regrets. And now I'm a full-fledged boater. And part of my vision that I'm manifesting is in the next year and a half, I'm going to be on a boat for, 6 months of the year. And I'm going to be helping people go through what I went through to find freedom. So took it to the Florida Keys. In the midst of it being in the Florida Keys, I went through my transformation and I realized, oh my gosh, I was only doing this to prove the world. So I went back with a couple buddies, and by that time I'd given up weed and alcohol. And so the ride back was different. No weed and alcohol, not as much partying, just as much fun though.
Yeah.
And now the boat is about 200 yards from the Pentagon in Northern Virginia.
Sick, dude. All right. So let's get into that part of the story where you say you went down to the Florida Keys, you had your transformation. We don't really have to talk about, we can talk about your experience, but I'm curious for people who are listening to this and are like, okay, you recognize some part of yourself in that. I think it's natural to feel like, well, how do you turn that off though? That's just a part of who I am at this point, right? Like I'm the guy that fixes the problems. I'm the guy that gets the money. I'm the woman who, connects everybody. Like whatever your thing is, it's easy to just feel like that's who I am. So how do you get out of that or change it or transform?
So you used the word, it's part of being a human, feeling not enough. It's not, because no one is born not feeling enough. All of the issues that you have in your life right now are created from a thinking problem. And you've heard the change your thinking, change your life, but not many people really know how to do that. So your thinking problems were created not when you were born, but some point after that, when you went through some type of stressful situation in your life where control was taken from you, or stress happened, or you weren't loved, or your needs weren't met. Yeah. And you develop these stories, these meanings around those events because you had to come up with a story. Something's bad is happening to you at 6 years old. You've got to make sense of it. Well, why is this happening? Well, it's got to be me, because if it's the other person, if it's my parent, if it's their responsibility, then I have no control, Dan. If it's me, if I'm bad and my dad's hitting me with a belt and he's making fun of me, it's because I'm bad. If I can only be good, then maybe my dad will stop hitting me with a belt and making fun of me, and my parents will stop fighting. So yeah. I had control. It was actually my brain's way of giving me hope for a better tomorrow. Fast forward to 47 years old when you're buying the boat because your brain's saying I'm bad, and I put myself in a situation, that could have been dangerous. I lost an engine and I was going through this pass in the ocean that I never should have been in. I didn't know. Had my other engine have failed, I don't know what would have happened, but it wouldn't have been pretty. That doesn't serve me well, right? So no, it's not a human condition. I believe most people on the planet to some degree have some level of I am not enough. but it's not something you were born with, and it's destructive to you. It is absolutely destructive to your relationships, to your health, to your business finances, to how you are as a leader, as a father, as a mother. So once how do you do it? It's exactly what I did in 3 hours. You go back to the scenes that created those meanings and those traumas, and you say, well, what was the meanings? And then you ask yourself, were they true? And they're never true. If you're suffering, it's because you are living under untrue thoughts. You can't suffer when you live in the truth. And what does that mean? It means that here's the truth, that no one can take this away from you. You are enough. You always were enough, and you always will be enough. No matter what anyone has ever said to you, that is who you are. You are a human being. Just for the fact of you being a human, you are enough. And so once you can live in that truth, everything has changed. In my world, everything has changed.
So okay. So let's say, and I don't know, I'm going to project onto our audience here, right? Because the audience is real estate investors, famously pragmatic type of person, right? So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I get it. Okay, we all have bad childhoods or whatever. And yes, maybe I've got coping mechanisms that are kind of holding me back. But we talked about in the beginning, right, that this is something that you're doing a lot with entrepreneurs. I know you've worked with a lot of real estate investors. So how does that show up in their businesses, right? What does fixing this kind of problem fix for them in their sort of day-to-day business lives, if that's what they're concerned with?
Yeah, so I've lost track of when this podcast is coming out. It may be out now, it may be out in a couple of weeks, but Brent Bowers was on my podcast, and he is, if you're a real estate investor, you may know him because he owns a company called Land Sharks. And he came to me, again, I'm only disclosing this because he said this publicly. Otherwise, I wouldn't say a word. He came to me with overwhelm. After we worked on that and solved that, he didn't come to me to make more money. He came to me to have a better relationship with, well, actually, that was the only reason he came to me. After that, he realized that, oh my gosh, my relationship with my son and my kids can improve, my wife can improve. And oh, by the way, since working with you, Brad, my business, my income has absolutely doubled. Why? Why is that, Dan? How come he came to me with overwhelm? Well, if you have this I am not enough feeling, you are likely in a fight or flight state, most of you. You're probably spending 70% in fight or flight. What does that mean? It means the proverbial lion is chasing you. So you're constantly in this aroused state of, oh my gosh, where's the danger? How can you run a business? How can you think of your life's purpose? How can you creatively think of the next steps when you're frantically looking for the lion, right? So how did his business transform? He realized that he didn't have to be everything to all of his clients. They were texting him day and night. He was like, why am I doing this? It was like him being a people pleaser. So he's like, I'm cutting that. So he's working less hours, making more money, and his relationships with his wife and kids, and even his kids' behavioral issues have improved, all by fixing this feeling around, panic and I'm not enough.
So how do people know what to work on if they're coming to work with you? You mentioned, for example, it's not like when you were, before you went through this process, you weren't waking up every day saying oh, gee, I'm not enough. I'm going to buy a boat, right? That's kind of under the surface. So how do people get at those issues?
Yeah, great question. So you can go take the self-love quiz at bradchandler.com/quiz, or I can, here's a couple of poignant questions in there. There's 12 of them. I won't do all 12, but do you have issues being in an intimate, deeply connected relationship with someone you feel safe with? Or are you not in a relationship and you haven't been for years? Or are you in a bad relationship? Do you just go from one relationship to the next? That's a really good indication that you may lack self-love. Do you take things personally? Do you have an addiction to anything? Do you have self-destructive behaviors? Do you always have to be right? Are you pissed off a lot? Do you talk negatively to yourself? Do you judge other people a lot? Do you judge yourself? Those are all indications that there is an issue with prior programming in your life that could and probably is negatively impacting every area of your life.
All right. So if people are listening to this, right, bradchandler.com/quiz. And I'll have the link to the show notes and everything on the episode as well. But bradchandler.com/quiz, you can go there and take that quiz for free and kind of see what the deal is.
Want to find motivated seller leads online, but don't know where to start? Download our free Motivated Seller Keyword Report today. AdWords nerds have spent over $5 million this year researching the most profitable keywords for finding motivated seller leads. And you can grab these exact keywords when you download our report at www.adwordsnerds.com/keywords.
Hey, business chaos. I didn't mention that. That's another one. I just did a podcast literally minutes before hanging up with you, minutes before this one, and the lady was a healer as well, and she said she was dealing with this guy. One of her biggest success stories ever was this really, really wealthy guy who helped Fortune 100 companies improve their sales. And he came to her. He's like, I was 3 hours on the phone this morning, holding the phone, not being able to make a sales call. Why was that? Because he had these self-limiting beliefs from childhood. So if you find yourself in your business, like I make $100,000 and then I blow it by either making a big mistake or I'm constantly starting a project, stopping a project, chasing every shiny object. My people are like, they don't know what's my head spinning, right? I've got everyone head spinning. Those are all indications that you've got this frantic energy and this fight or flight that's from this underlying thought of I'm not enough, so therefore I've got to do more.
So when people, well, let me ask about you a little bit more. So like in terms of your life, your business, your relationships today versus Boat Brad. I know you still have the boat, but Boat Brad now is forever the metaphor of like sailing off to find yourself as too strong. So there's past Brad and there's current Brad. How have your life and business and relationships changed today? Like what's different for you?
Well, I mean, everything has changed. In my business, I shifted from trying to prove myself. After that 3 hours was over, I felt so light because I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. So what am I going to do with my life? I'm going to start making an impact. So I came back and I started literally helping. Started coaching my employees. I started thinking, how can we make a greater impact on our sellers? How can we make an impact on our employees? How can we make this a better place for them? So the culture around my company has changed because as a leader, I'm not like, where are the numbers? Where are the numbers? We got to make more. We got to make more because my survival depends on this. So, and because of that, my net worth over the last 3 years, Dan, has gone up exponentially higher than any 3-year period. And prior to that, the chaos is gone. Like we're on this steady stream of growth. I don't need to do a hockey stick to prove to the world anymore. We're just growing steadily each month. And we got a great core of people. So that's the business. I now opened a new business, this Brad Chandler coaching, where it's the first business since I was in 7th grade that I opened where I didn't have money at the forefront. It's not how much money can I make, it's how many people's lives can I impact. Now I get to wake up and do exactly what I love to do every single day, and that's help entrepreneurs transform their lives by ripping out and recoding these false beliefs that they've lived with for so many years. Relationship. I'm in an 18-month relationship with my life partner who happens to be my business partner in the coaching company, and man, is it different. In my previous marriages, my ex-wives would come to me, hey, this is what you did to bother me, or that bothered me, I should say. What would I do? Fight or flight. I would fight. I'd be like, well, you did this, this, and this. And then I'd flight. For 3 or 4 days, I would be completely distant, cold. I couldn't touch them. I wasn't affectionate. I had this weight on my chest. I didn't like it. I didn't know why it was happening. It was because my subconscious brain was saying, see, I told you weren't enough. And I had to fight to show them that I was enough. That was my interesting way of doing it. Now everything's different. Now it's the conflict in our relationship actually brings us closer, and it should bring you closer, not further apart. So relationship with my kids has changed. My kids used to have anxiety. They don't have anxiety anymore. So my health, I'm in the best health I've ever been in my life. I don't drink. I don't smoke weed. I work out 5 times a week. I don't ever wake up hungover and say I can't go to the gym. So everything has changed.
Yeah, man. I wanted to say, just for people who are listening to this, right? Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on specifically to have this conversation was the last time you were on the podcast, we sort of talked about this when we talked about real estate, and then we kind of got into what you're doing today. And I was like very skeptical. I will say, like, I'm a very analytical, like I always say, like my right hand is actually a Google sheet, it's a spreadsheet. Like I'm a pretty analytical person, fairly think I'm pretty skeptical very science-based, rationalist, whatever you want to call it, right? That's my general worldview. And not saying it's right or wrong. It's just that's how I am. And so when you came on the podcast, the first time you were talking about your transformation, and I was like, that's great. That's awesome for you. But I was very skeptical about it. And, the way I tend to handle things like that is I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to try it and see what the deal is. Fully not expecting it to have any impact on me whatsoever. I mean, but I was like, okay, I'll go into it open-minded, but that would have been my prediction. And I had a huge reaction to working with you. Really had a massively powerful and positive impact on my life. Like for me, it was tons of critical self-talk. Like I just beat myself up in my own head all day, every day, like to extreme levels, right? Like just anyone talk to my kids that way, you'd have to pull me off of them, like that kind of intensity. And I worked with you, and I think over the course of 3 sessions or something, it completely went away. That was more than a year now since we've worked together, and just completely changed the quality of my life. So the reason that I wanted to have you on is specifically because I think for people who are very analytical and, you think of yourself as like a brass tacks kind of person, or, someone who deals with, like reality with a capital R, it's easy to dismiss talk of a personal transformation or this kind of change in how you feel, because it's hard to hold on to it, right? It's hard to put a number on that, right? It's hard to say what is the impact, right? You could try, but it's difficult. But even for someone like me who came in very sort of skeptical to begin with, I had a massive reaction. I just want people to know about this work that you're doing, and I don't want people to dismiss it outright. If you're like me and you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, it's kind of not my thing, what I would say is give it a shot. Like, Brad is not exactly waving incense around the house or anything, right? He's a pretty down-to-earth type of person. And I would highly encourage, even if you have that kind of reaction, really just approach things with an open mind and see if it's kind of something that might work for you. I will say, Brad, we are actually going to do a webinar on this. We want to do a deeper presentation. We weren't really able to dive all the way in this kind of podcast, but we wanted to have you do a real kind of hardcore presentation where you get into this more, how it actually works. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah. Let me just comment if I can share what you can.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Because I think you've said this publicly, so, and you can.
Well, I'm saying it publicly now, so it counts. So it's fine. Yeah.
So you came to me and you said, if I can move my negative self-talk on a scale of 1 to 10 from 11 to 8, I'll deem that as a success.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you 3 or 4 weeks in, where is that level? And you said 0.
Yeah.
And it's been a year now. And I asked you about a month or 2 ago, and you said 0.
Yeah.
Is it still a 0?
Yeah. It's still a 0, man. It's very odd. One of the reasons that I asked, spoiler alert, some leading questions that I'm peppering in here, but one of the reasons that I asked about, it's hard to feel like you can change these things that you identify with. You're like, well, that's just the way I am. If you had asked me, I'd be like, yeah, that negative self-talk, that's just who I am at this point, right? That's been a 40-year thing. That's not a new thing that developed. That's been there a really long time. And to have something like that literally vanish, just kind of overnight, is a weird experience, but it's an awesome experience because it really does show you in a way that's hard to believe if someone just tells you this, but it shows you that these things you feel like are permanent do not have to be that way. They really don't. And that's a profound thing to learn about the world. You know what I mean? It's weird.
And how much better, that's a leading question. How is life different that you don't have this incessant negative talk in your life?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, man. You really do realize that a lot of the things that you do are in order to avoid negative emotions that you just assume you're going to have, right? So, you at the boat, I have whatever. There's all these sort of behaviors that I have, even positive behaviors in a lot of ways, right? I'm a great student. I'm a good reader. I'm a good note taker. I do my homework, all these things, right? A lot of those are there because I'm afraid on some level of, like I said, being judged or being criticized, even internally. And, when I had that kind of negative self-talk really just go away, and it's again, negative self-talk is like a vague thing. I'm not talking literally like a voice in my head I would hear like 10 times a day that was like, Dan, you suck at this. Like you should go do something else. So like not having that there, it really opened up this like big stretch of possibility for me where I was like, oh, I can do anything, right? I can kind of do anything, or I don't have to do the stuff I've always done. I can do it a different way, right? And that's, for me, it wasn't like hey, I woke up the next day and all my problems were gone. That certainly didn't happen. But what it has led is, at this point in my life, a lot of kind of introspection on what I really want, sort of redirecting to different things, focusing on different parts of my life or different things that I'm interested in that before I kind of just didn't feel like I had the permission to do. And I'm still figuring out what that means for me, but it is a massively freeing experience in that way. You know what I mean?
Feels great, right?
Yeah, feels great.
Back to the webinar. Most entrepreneurs like myself get into business because they think if I can make $5 million, if I can make $10 million, then I'll have this feeling of happiness or worthiness. And that's a complete myth. What we'll teach you and do a more deep dive on this webinar that we're going to do is I can show you how to get this feeling or this state of mind that you think is going to come when you make $5 or $10 million. I can show you how to get that today. And once you have that freedom that Dan's talking about and that love of yourself and stopping the negative self-talk, your likelihood of making it to that $5 or $10 million hurdle jumps exponentially. So we'll teach you how to have inner success so that you can have outer success. And what I've done over the last 3 years is I'm a living testament to it. And I've then, after I've done the work on myself, if you're going to go to someone who's going to give you advice, I like to go to people who have actually done what it is that they're teaching. You can't say that about a majority of therapists. And most therapists focus on the conscious mind, which is only responsible for 5% of your behavior. These programming issues that we're talking about, these deeply seated beliefs, they're all in your subconscious brain. They are responsible for 95% of your behavior. So I went I figured out myself, and then I went to some of the best people I think in the world on this subject. And I've compiled this training program, this transformation program that you went through, Dan, that basically, it's got 3 R's. It's the recognize. You've got to be aware of what is driving your behavior that you want to change. Because when you came to me, you were just like every other client. Dan, why do you have negative self-talk? I have no idea. Yeah. Well, now you know, right? You became aware of it. So now that you know, we're going to recode that beautiful brain of yours through this process called neuroplasticity. It's just a fancy way of saying, they didn't even know this, except they learned this in the last 20 years. You can now literally take out neurons in your brain that are telling you these negative things or have these stories, and you can replace them with the positive thoughts. So that's the second R, is the recognize, recode, and then the third R is rewrite. You get to train your brain, just like Dan has done, to never talk negatively, to give you the exact life that you want. So anyway, in that webinar, we'll dive deep into how you do that. If you've got marriage issues, if you're drinking too much, if your business is in chaos, if you're overweight, everything, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, racing mind, you can't sleep, all of these will be tracked back to that same thing, that overwhelming feeling of, whatever yours is. I don't want to keep saying I'm not enough, because yours could be different. But it's your brain is protecting you from what it thinks is worse. So we just go and figure out, we show you, here's the thing you think is worse. And you're like, well, wait, that's not even true. And then your brain's like, ding, 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 mismatch detector. Wait, if that's not true, do I need to drink anymore? Do I need to have a shitty marriage? But whatever it is, no, you don't. And it just goes away, just like your negative self-talk. You figured out the source of it. You figured out it wasn't true. And then boom, the quote symptom, the negative self-talk, vanished.
Yeah, it really is. It's a bizarre experience when you go through it, which is why I want people to actually go watch this thing that we're going to do together, because it really is like, the more you learn about it, the weirder it's going to sound, but it absolutely works in real life. If people out there are like me, like you're a sucker for where's the research? There's a ton of clinical research that goes into this kind of work now. And has increasingly become used for the treatment of all kinds of different issues and problems. Doesn't mean every single person on earth has the same problem and, whatever. But, I always say to people, like, no matter how successful you are right now, and if you're listening to this, you're probably a successful person, right? Like, nobody is listening to this podcast on, because they're barely scraping by. You're listening to this podcast because, hey, even if you're not exactly where you want to be, you're smart, you're capable, you're a hard worker. Like, if you're listening to this, you're probably doing okay. But no matter how good you're doing right now, I can nearly guarantee you're probably driving with the emergency brake on. And it's like, you might be flooring it and like going fast, but if you can just let up on the emergency brake, the whole thing becomes a lot easier and a lot more pleasant. And it really can change your life. So we're going to put that webinar, and we're going to just put it up at adwordsnerds.com/Brad. So adwordsnerds.com/Brad. I will just forward to that video. That way we don't have to figure out the links. It'll be easy. So go to adwordsnerds.com/Brad. You can go check that out from Brad Chandler. Brad, we got to wrap it up, but I want to touch base just real quick. So obviously, bradchandlercoaching.com, that's the website. How do you work with people now? And where do you want people to follow up with you?
Yeah, bradchandler.com/contact has everything under the sun. The self-love quiz, my podcast, How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs, and all my social media. It also has a link to book a call. I would say start with the self-love quiz and then book a call with me. I will also say, if you're like, well, the only problem I have is my marriage or my relationship, this goes hand in hand with what we're saying. I took on a gentleman a couple months before I worked with you, Dan, and he came to me because his marriage was on the brink of divorce. You ask him now, and he's in real estate, very successful real estate investor. His marriage has transformed. Did I ever have a marriage counseling session with him? Nope. Did I ever meet his wife? Nope. Did I ever even talk to her? Nope. But it's completely changed because he reconnected with himself and he changed relationship with himself. So again, this stuff is powerful. It's powerful stuff. And if I can help you in any way, just know that if you're suffering or struggling with anything, you don't deserve that. And whatever you're suffering with, it's not your fault. It's your brain's just doing its job from something it thought. It's kind of hanging on to your childhood self because it thinks it's still protecting you. So we just show you, hey, you don't need that protection anymore. And what you're thinking just isn't even true. So boom, everything, all the suffering that you have can literally go away in a matter of hours, just like it did with Dan, just like it did with me, and just like it's done with 100 of my clients.
Yeah. I would, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but go check it out. It's bradchandler.com. You can also go to adwordsnerds.com/Brad to get that webinar and see what Brad's talking about, because again, I highly recommend it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be on the show. Brad Chandler, thank you so much for being here, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Again, if you want to get the free webinar that we are putting up, it's going to be at adwordsnerds.com/Brad. That's adwordsnerds.com/Brad. You can go there and get that video for free. Again, I worked with Brad. I don't make anything for saying this. I had a hugely positive impact on my life from my work with Brad. Really changed the trajectory of my career, and I wish the same for you. So go check it out at adwordsnerds.com/Brad. Tell them Dan Barrett sent you. I will talk to you guys next week. Have a good one. Cheers.
This is the podcastfactory.com.